Hello Minders, welcome back to another Mind Shot vlog. So my wife and I went to one of our favorite places, back to Biltmore Estate in North Carolina, and they were having a costume display, costumes from the Titanic. Just thought maybe you'd like to see a few shots from that. Just some really top-notch designed costumes and very fitting to the period which the Vanderbilts lived in this house. So they would have been contemporary with the Titanic tragedy. And of course I can't go to Biltmore Estate without taking a look and getting a few shots of the Albrecht Dürer prints. You know, he was mostly known for his woodcuts, etchings, and prints. But a lot of people don't realize he was a really fantastic watercolor painter. And he was one of the first European artists to do landscape, which I thought was also interesting. That was unusual for the late 1400s. But let's go back to last week's episode on paper comparisons, and I have a few thoughts on that. And wow, I'll tell you, you guys know how to blow up an episode. I am so amazed at how the last episode on cheap versus quality paper comparison has just totally blown up. Incredible. And so many of you gave just excellent testimonials. I challenge anybody who is still thinking about whether to use cheap paper or to invest in arches to just read through some of the testimonials. They say as well or better everything that I've been saying about it, not only arches, but cotton papers in general. And some of you just gave some really great little anecdotes and stories. So glad that you've discovered the joy of using cotton paper. But now, with that said, let me make some clarifications, okay? Some very important clarifications. And I said it in that video, but I just want to stress again, I understand some of you cannot afford good cotton paper, or it's not available, or if it is available, it's at an exorbitant price due to that availability. I understand. I fully understand. Please, please, please do not get rid of your cheaper paper. You can learn to paint on it. Really, that video was just about giving you information. It was giving you a comparison just so you could see. Some of you have access to cotton paper, but you just don't want to spend the money right now. And I totally understand that. This just shows you what you're aiming for and why. By no means was that video meant to say, you can't paint unless you have the best paper. You might as well not even try. You might as well just go away. In no way was it meant to state that. So you paint on what you have. I want to give you some tips, so hang on to the end. I want to give you some tips for painting on cheaper paper like Canson XL. It did seem like most of you that had bought cheaper paper had bought Canson XL. A few of you Strathmore 400. Both of those papers can be used successfully. It is a little harder for beginners to learn on. There are a lot of experienced painters, including myself, who've learned how to paint on it, but I'll give you a few tips, a few pointers on what to do when you paint on that. Now, I got a few negative comments, and I just wanted to also clarify, I have not been sponsored by anybody, particularly Arches. I've never seen Arches sponsor anybody on YouTube. I mean, actually, I'd be thrilled if they contacted me to do that, because it'd be a great sponsorship for them probably. But you know what? They don't need to sponsor anybody. Their reputation basically sells the paper for them. So I'm not sponsored by anybody. While I used Arches as my control, there are other great cotton papers out there. So don't feel like if you want to get a good cotton paper, you have to buy Arches. I keep going back to that because it's the paper I've always painted on. It never lets me down. You know, all the other cotton papers I've tried are pretty good, but none of them really unseat Arches as the best, and granted, some of the differences are very minuscule. The important point, again, let me stress, is I'm just giving you information that will compare and show you what you will get by using cotton paper. If those things are not meaningful to you, you paint in a style that's loose, 1 or 2 layer type painting, washi, spattery style, I don't know, put whatever qualifier you want on it. That's fine. It's your decision, and it's not something you have to feel bad about, and it's not something you have to look at the things I said about Arches and say, I might as well not even get started. That's just ridiculous. Now, for those of you who are interested in getting a cotton paper, you want to know what other brands are available so you can compare and get the best value, I have put a list. I put a list in the video that I did last on this, but I'm going to repeat it down here. I have 16 brands that I have thought of. Most of them I've tried and can recommend. A few of them I have not. But if you're abroad or in foreign countries, some of these may be available. And I'm sure there are brands abroad that I've never even seen or heard of. These are just ones I know about and have been able to find some information about. And even in the list of ones I've not tried, I've ordered as many on that list as I could find and get supplied for in the US, so I will be trying them. There's only one cotton paper that I really decided I don't like very much, and that's fluid. Now, if you like fluid, don't take me to task on it, that's fine. It didn't work very well for me. I thought it stained easily, but if you're getting good results on fluid, great. Keep using it. But that's the only cotton paper that I really didn't put in the list. There's so much preference in all this, folks. You have to take the information and decide what to do with it. And I know I'm starting to repeat myself more and more. Now, another thing I said that got a few of you confused was that I don't even use the best arches. Well, I kind of misstated that. Arches tear-off pads are really the same as the blocks and the sheets. I had to go look to make sure. I've always kind of been under the impression it was made a little differently. Now I don't think that it is. I will say that I've never seen a difference in the performance of the tear-off pads to the blocks and the sheet. So I think that's evidence enough. So don't be confused by that statement. I don't think there is a cheaper grade arches. That was just a term I shouldn't use. I think of it as cheaper because it's the cheapest form of arches I can get, so I use that as practice. Tear-off pads. I can get a better deal on that than any other form of arches paper. So it just kind of makes me think of it as the cheaper, arches. All right, so let's talk a minute about painting on cheaper paper, if that's what you have, and that's the only option you have to use, or you've decided that that's what you want to practice on, go for it. Paint on what you have. Don't give up just because you can't get cotton paper. But just a couple of ideas. 4 things I can tell you right away that you can do on Canson XL that don't turn out too bad is line and wash or ink and wash. Canson XL takes ink very well. Painting wash over line is usually very simple, flat washes, very little layering, maybe a little charging in here and there. Usually you're staying very loose. Ink and wash does great. And I have decided, I think, that all of my watercolor journals, which right now are primarily pulp paper watercolor journals with the exception of something like the Perfect Sketchbook. All of my watercolor journals I'm going to relegate to line and wash primarily. And most of the birds in here, with the exception of this one, most of the birds are line and wash. These 3 are line and wash. This was laid down almost completely as one layer with just charging in a few of the dark values. So again, I wasn't dependent heavily on layers or a lot of wet and wet washes. All of these are line and wash and all turned out pretty well. So I'll continue working in this Strathmore 400 book in line and wash. Oh yeah, and this is a technique that works fairly well on inexpensive paper, and that's dry brush. If you remember my tutorial on this warbler, this was all done in dry brush, and this just kind of shows how painting drier is a great way to go on cheaper paper. Water-soluble graphite is another one, and in the same genre, watercolor pencils. They work fairly well. Again, it's because you're not doing a lot of layering. You're not doing a lot of big wet and wet washes. You're mostly drawing, at least the way I use it. It's mostly like a drawing medium, so it's not so bad. And if watercolor pencils are something that you have, or water-soluble graphite, or even watercolor markers, give it a try on the Canson XL, or the Strathmore for that matter. Many of you mentioned this in the comments, and I agree with you. Quick, loose study sketches. Usually fine on something like Canson XL or Strathmore 400. But that's getting into a more experienced type painter. Somebody who has enough control of the medium and knows how to work to the shortcomings, or the shortcomings of pulp paper don't matter. Again, beginners, pulp paper just is harder to learn on because you haven't learned those basic techniques yet. But those of you who know how to do quick studies, use them, know how to paint loosely or paint loosely, keep doing your studies, keep doing your sketches on XL if you want to. Weigh the pros and cons, the cost and availability versus pulp paper. If your style, if your painting and improvement is coming along on pulp paper, then don't worry about it. The 2 factors that showed up in my demonstration that you need to worry about the most are layering, extreme multiple layering, because paint in the underlying layers will loosen up. It just doesn't work so well on pulp paper, so you have to kind of work around that. And then number 2 is heavy wet and wet washes. Some wet and wet washes work, but if you get into a lot of it, you know, with lots of colors, lots of water, not so much. So you just have to paint away from those kind of techniques. Another tip for painting on cheaper paper, if you do layer, go darker. Going darker is not so bad as painting a light layer or like tinting a heavily pigmented layer. You're going to have a hard time on pulp paper. But if you're adding shadows and going darker, you don't have as much problem. Now they're still not as clean as you can get on cotton paper, but you can do it. And I would challenge all of you that are thinking of going ahead and investing in cotton paper, once you get some, do your own tests. Don't take my tests word for it. See how it affects your painting style. You may discover that the benefits that you get from cotton paper are not enough to stop practicing on the cheaper papers. So if you are going to buy the cotton paper, do some tests. Do some things painted the way that you normally paint and see what you think. I mean, in most cases, you're going to say that Arches is easier to paint on, but you may decide that that cheaper paper is something that you can live with for certain things. It might even just be color swatching. While you paint, and again, this is a more experienced painter thing. Beginners will have a hard time with this. But when you paint on cheap pulp paper, get in there and get out with your brush strokes. Make them clean, quick, and fresh. That is the best way to paint on cheaper paper. No fiddling. Pulp paper is famous for making beginners overwork their pieces. It just happens in the blink of an eye, and it's so hard to avoid. Even for someone as experienced as I get in and I'm working in a sketchbook that has pulp paper, and boom, like that, you know, a section will be overworked. So get in, get out, make fresh, quick, simple brush strokes. And one of the ways you can combat that is have a very tight drawing or use line and wash, like with ink. For those of you who are beginners and you are going to go ahead and invest in the cotton paper, once you gain some experience and some control, come back to the cheaper paper and give it a try. Then it may be something that you're more successful doing studies and practice on. Well, that's it. Again, folks, I put all the brands of cotton paper down below in the description. They're also in the video I did making the comparison demonstration. Now, I have viewers from all over the world. If you found a good cotton paper that you like, please tell other viewers from your region where they can find it. That would be a big help. And tell them what the brand is and give some ideas for suppliers. There are people in the comments wanting to know that live outside the US, where can I find a good cotton paper? Arches generally, in a lot of countries, is just out of reach, just too expensive. So you viewers that live outside the US, get involved and help out your fellow artists, okay? Thanks, everybody. I hope this was some kind of help. Maybe encourage some of you that felt like you didn't have any other options. Get out your paper and paint. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you in the next video.